tap some of the excess out. And then I'm just going to start gently, very gently introducing a bit more color. No pressure at all here into that sort of half moon shape here. And we can move the color about, you see, because it's all sitting on the paper. It isn't fixed yet. So we're just going to have a play. We're going to move the color around. And you see, I'm going to reload my brush now. The great thing is we can choose where we want to direct a bit more color. So it's a bit light here. So let's add some more color in so that we can build up that three-dimensional effect. And that's what we're going to be doing to get that three-dimensional effect on the petals of the flower we'll be painting today. So that's my first sort of sphere or spheroid, I guess. And you can see how we've got the darker color here moving to the lighter color here, just by getting our brush nice and wet and by moving the color around until we're happy with the way that it sits on the paper. So if everyone's happy with that basic way of doing things, I think we can just take our time and we can just do the same thing with these other circles here. Just have a play, making those gradients with a nice wet brush, just so that we're familiar with what we're doing. So once we've just finished having a play with adding some color into our spheres there, giving them a bit of a gradient, I'm just going to rinse my brush off by giving it a good swirl in my dirty water jar, tapping it on the side and then dipping it in my clean water. And we can just have another couple of minutes just to make sure that we're happy with what we're doing there. So are we happy with painting those spheres, or would we like a minute more?
I'm fine, thank you.
Yes?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, so we can move on now. We're just going to try some wet on wet. So for that, we're going to take our larger brush, this whacking great one here, and same thing, we're just going to put it in our clean water, just about halfway down, just wake it up a bit. I'm going to tap off the excess water here. And then we're not going to load any paint on straight away. What we're going to do is we're just going to make sure that this brush is nice and slightly wet, this brush here. And then we're just going to paint a thin layer of water onto part of our paper. So I'm going to do it here. And when we do that, we're just going to make sure that we can use those nice backwards and forwards even strokes. We don't want to soak our paper. We just want to get it to have a nice film of water on it. And I'm just going to do that all the way down. So once we've done that, once we've got a nice thin layer of water on, we're going to get our large brush. We're going to just do a nice even color wash on this side of the page. And so for this, again, I'm going to choose one of these colors, but it really doesn't matter which. I think I'm going to go for this sunshiny yellow here. So whichever color we want to use, we're just loading the brush up like that. We want to work some of that paint into the bristles, get it nice and full of color. And then once we've done that, we're just going to dip it very gently back in our water. And then using these backwards and forward strokes. We're just going to try just adding a nice even layer of color, just like this. You can see how I'm picking up those little edges there so that we don't get any unevenness. And whenever we feel like we're running out of paint, we're just going to just load some more on. Just load some more on back in the water and keep on going. We're going to do that down to the bottom of the page. The great thing is that this color is just sitting on the paper. It's not soaked in yet. So if it looks a little uneven, we can just even it up again. We can just pull the color around to where we'd like it to be. We can just have a minute more just to make sure that we're happy with just applying a nice even coat of color like that. I'm going to rinse off this brush, give it a good swirl in my dirty water jar, and then just tap it back in my clean water. Now, once we're all happy with that, we're going to try and bring what we've learned all together, and we're going to want to have a look at our anemone. So I think you've all been sent a couple of sheets of watercolor paper. We're now going to move on to a second sheet. So I'm going to unstick mine. I'm going to get a fresh one. And again, I'm going to whack down some masking tape, but that is just a preference, of course. So while I'm doing this, if we could all get our photo of the anemone up, and we're just going to have a look at the different components of that picture. So we've got the shapes of these petals, and then we've got the middle of the flower. We've got the background as well, and we're going to think about how we're going to paint each of those bits in just a moment. But before we do that, I'm afraid I'm going to have to bore you with a story about this particular picture, because this was a picture that I took myself, and it's of a flower. It's a Bernard anemone, is what it's called, and it was named after an ancestor of mine, a churchman, Canon Bernard, who was also a botanist in his spare time, and he bred this particular flower, and that was a good 150 years ago. And from where I am down in Dorset, we still have a few sprouting every spring. So that's a nice thing for me to see when I'm back there. And what we're going to do as we paint this is we're going to pop it up somewhere where we can see it. There we go. And we're going to take our size 6 or 8 brush, our medium-sized brush, and we're going to want to begin by just sketching out the outline of those petals there, just like we did with the circles that then became spheres. So with our medium-sized brush, again, it's probably got a bit dry, so we're going to wake it up again. A dab of water, knocking off some of the excess. And now in our color palettes, we are going to do, well, I think the color best here is this one here, which I think is called Rose on your sheets. So we're just going to load our brush up with some of that. And so wet on dry. So as we do this, we're going to want to paint a nice controlled thin line. Very, very little, no pressure. Little to no pressure whatsoever. So I'm going to, having a look at this, I think I'm going to start with this fairly distinctive curve here of this petal. And of course you can start where you'd like, but I think that's going to be a handy place for me to start. So just with little to no pressure, brush at quite a steep angle. I'm just going to start tracing out that line.
Sorry, Felix, have you already drawn this on your paper or not? Are you drawing on blank paper now? Are you painting?
I haven't. No, I'm drawing on blank paper, and there's a reason for this, because I think sometimes we feel like we need to create guidelines for ourselves. We need to do a pencil drawing or something beforehand. But I think really it's the same principle with a brush. We're sort of sketching it out with the brush, if you like. And the great thing is that it's not indelible. We're not painting in oils here. So if we do feel like we make a mistake, well, firstly, the great thing is it's watercolor. It's sitting on the paper. So we can just go over it again. We can, when we come to do wet on wet, we can just smudge that in and fill that in. And otherwise we can use a bit of wet kitchen roll to just erase it. So it's very easy to rework. So I think it's most helpful and most fun if we just draw our outline in wet on dry like this, like we did with our circles.
Okay, thanks.
I'm just going to wait a minute or two just so we're all happy with our outlines. Is everyone happy with their outlines, or should we take a minute more?
Can I ask you something?
Yes, hi.
Hi. I've done 2 outlines, and both of them have turned out absolutely hopeless, because on the right-hand side, I tend to go out to the right, and on the left, I keep in the circle. So I'll show you. Can you see?
I'm just going to have a look. Well, I think that's fine. I think that's very nice.
It's one-sided. You see what I mean? It's a big lump on the right and not so much on the left.
I see what you mean, but the great thing is that this isn't an exact science. And if we have a look at mine, I think this petal here's got a bit of a life of its own, but ultimately it's going to look like an anemone. So I think that's a perfectly nice outline. I think we're all good.
Oh, well, we go from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I expect it to be perfect, and I'm an absolutely crap drawer, so I can paint inside the lines, but to do the outlines is hard for me.
Well, that looks great. I mean, it's just a matter of practice, isn't it? So
Yeah.
we shall have a think then about the way that we fill this in. I'm just going to, there we go. So we're going to have a look at the colors in our flower now that we've got the basic outline. And in doing so, we're going to bear in mind, of course, one of the cardinal rules of watercolor painting, which is that we always add light colors first and then dark colors. So we can see straight away that these black bits of pollen seeds, these black bits, they're going to be the last thing that we add in. We're going to start with the lightest color, which to me looks like this band of a sort of pale beige, sort of buff color, just around the base of the petals here. And if we look again, we can see that it's not a crisp, fine line that divides that color from the pink of the petals. It's this almost as though it's bleeding in. It's bleeding into the pink of the petals. And so, bearing that in mind, we're going to try just some wet on wet, just to get a nice, gentle band of that pale color, just around the middle of the flower. So we're going to first of all get our big brush from earlier. We're just going to dab that in water. No paint just at the minute. And then just in the area on our outline where that ring would be, we're just going to do what we did with that wash earlier. And we're just going to paint a really delicate, light film of water, making sure we don't go over our outline from before, because we want that to stay nice and sharp. So once we've done that, we're going to take our medium-sized 6 or 8 brush. We're going to make sure that's nice and free of paint, and then we're going to paint that little outline. And looking at our palette, the color that looks best to me is this peach orange here, is the one it's called on your sheets, just this fella here. So with a bit of water on our brush, not too much, we're just going to load it with peach orange. And then again, like we did before, just a dab of water, just to get it slightly dilute. And then again, with that forwards and back motion, we're just going to drop some color in, just so that we can get that nice light band around the base of the petals.
Okay, Felix, sorry, I'm slightly behind. That when you did the wash just now, did you do it over the whole of the middle or just in a circle around the bit?
I did it roughly over the middle, but it really doesn't matter because we're not going to be doing the rest of the middle until a bit later on. So it can go into the rest of the middle. I think all that matters is that we're just in the center here and that we don't want our wash to go blurring our outline from earlier. That's all that really matters.
Okay.
By the way, if you are ever anyone a bit behind and would just like me to pause or to slow down, please do just say so. I mean, if we were in the real world, then I'd be able to see where everyone was and how everyone was getting on. But because we're in computer land, it's a bit harder for me to tell. So please do just let me know if that's the case. Are we all happy we've added in that band of yellow there? If so, we're just going to have a look at the petals themselves, because that's the next bit that we're going to do. And where again, we're going to be doing like we did when we filled in our spheres from earlier. We're going to be using a nice dilute brush with paint, but fairly dilute paint, just to wash in this pale color here. But we're going to have a real look at the petals themselves, because of course they're not all the same color, they're not all a uniform shade. We've got some shadows, we've got some darker bits, we've got places where petals overshadow each other, like here or here. Most of the petals seem to be a little bit darker in their midsection or towards the base, like this one and this one. So we're just going to pay attention to some of the little gradients that we've got going on here. And just as we did when we did our spheres earlier, we're just going to try and replicate that now. So if everyone's ready, we're going to grab our medium-sized brush again. Again, just going to load it up with rose from earlier. And then once we've done that, once we've got it nice and full of paint, we're just going to dip it once gently in our water again. Because what we're going to want to do is to pull some nice dilute color all the way over what we've got. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the tip and then I'm going to just work my way down. And then once we've got a fairly even coating of light pink, we're just going to really pay attention to where the darker bits are. So we can see there's a bit of shade here, there's a bit of darkness here. And then we're just going to want to try and copy that. We're just going to get a bit more color on a brush that again, we've loaded with color and then just dipped very slightly in our water. And we're just going to stipple it with color like that, just to introduce a bit of shade. just to introduce a bit of interest here. Turning the brush as we go. And then we're just going to repeat what we've done here for the rest of the petals. We're just going to start off nice and light, nice dilute color, just to wash in all of the petal up until our little pale band that we've created. And then we bleed gently into that band. And then once we've got that foundation of pale color, we have a good look at the picture. We have a good look at where the shade is, a good look at where things are a little darker, where things are a little lighter. We're going to add color, or we're going to drag color around on the paper accordingly.
Felix, mine looks very sort of stipply. I can't get rid of that effect. Yours looks more blurred.
Okay, Sylvia, would you mind showing me what you've got, just so I can have a look? Thank you. I'm just going to have a look.
Hang on, I don't know where I am on here.
Yes, I can see you. I think that looks fine. I think if you want to blur it a little bit more, what you need to do is, if you've been, dropping in color like that, it's then a matter of using that backwards and forwards stroke, like I was saying. We run backwards and forwards, and if we want to blur in a gradient, we can add a bit more water, and then use these backwards and forwards strokes to draw paint through from the darker areas into the lighter areas. And if we're doing that, then we should avoid what I think is might be happening with you, which is that when you lift the brush off, the pigment all collects in a little pool. Yeah, so if we make sure that we're using next to no pressure whatsoever, backwards and forwards, very, very light, then we should be able to, as we add more water, just to create that little gradient there. Okay.
Felix, can I just ask you, what are you doing at the point where the petal meets the central orangey bit?
So all I'm doing there is I'm just using a fairly dilute brush just to gently flick the paint in, just so that it blends a little bit, just so that we get that blurred, slightly bled outline there. But again, that's the great thing, is that's something we can pick up on later. That's something that with a brush just loaded with water, we could pull this color out so that it comes in there. So it's all just provisional, but just as long as they meet and just as long as they, say hello and bleed a little bit, I think that's all fine.
Okay, thanks.
Chilly.
Okay, folks, so I'm finished with my petals now. Wherever you are, don't worry, I just see that we've got about 15 minutes left, so I think we'll just have another minute if we're still on the petals, and then however far we've got, just in about a minute odd, we're going to move on to have a look at the other bits of the flower. And then, of course, you know, once I've left, if you want to carry on with petals that you haven't finished yet, then of course you're very welcome to do so. Okay, folks, so wherever we are with the petals, really no need to worry if we're not finished yet. I think we're just going to have a think about the other bits of the flower. So we're just going to take our same medium brush. We're just going to make sure we can clean all the rows off it. So a good swirl in our dirty water jar, quick tap, and then a quick dip in our clean water jar. We get rid of the excess water. And as I said earlier, when we're using watercolors, we really want to think about painting the lighter colors first and then going through the darker on top. So when we look at our picture, well, the next darkest bit is this sort of shaded dark red bit here. So that's what I think it would be good to do now. Looking at our color palette, I reckon that the color they've called crimson, this one here, would be the best for that. So we're just going to, with a nice damp brush, moist brush, we're just going to load some of that on. And we're going to be doing a similar sort of thing to what we did with our, with our band of pale orange earlier, only we're not going to wet the paper beforehand. We're just going to get a brush that's loaded with that color. And then we're going to dip it once in our water, just to make it a bit dilute. And then we're just going to start introducing some color, just running around here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the tip of the brush just to introduce these little bits of color bleeding in to the little band of pale orange around. And we don't have to be precise. We don't have to worry, because when we come to do the dark bit at the very middle, well, of course, we can just paint straight over this lighter color. So it's not like we need to get this absolutely perfect, because as I've said, it's not an exact science.
Sorry, Felix, your head is slightly in the way of the picture.
Ah, sorry. Thank you for telling me. Please, yes, anyone, if ever I start doing that, let me know. It's a habit I can't quite get out of. So as I said, no need to be massively exact. We just want to get that color down there. And then I'm just going to clear the crimson off my brush. And then once we're happy with that, I'm going to take my smaller brush. I'm using a number 4 here, but just as long as it's a nice mini brush, it's a bit more slender than our old one, that doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to set my medium-sized brush aside for a moment. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to have a look at these. You would have thought that I'd have brushed up on my botany beforehand and could say exactly what these were. Are they bits of pollen? Are they seeds? Well, they're these little blue bits. And I think what we're going to do next is we're going to add those in. We're going to use our small brush for that. And again, we're going to use quite concentrated paint. We don't want it too diluted, because we're trying to do like we did when we did our outline. We want a nice, clearly defined shape here, nice, clearly defined little blobs that we can add in. So we're going to have a look again at our palette. And I reckon that the best one for this job is our midnight blue here. But we've got a bunch of murky dark blues, haven't we? So if you disagree, feel free to choose what you reckon looks best. Just going to make sure that this brush is awake, swirl it about in some water, and then tap off the excess water, and then load it up. Very important to tap off that excess water, because like I said, we don't want too much water here. We don't want the paint to start bleeding out. We want it to be quite crisp. And now, just to begin with, we're going to avoid our little circle of crimson, because I think that's still drying. We don't want the paint to talk to each other too much here. We just want it to sit on top. So I'm just going to have a rough look. But again, we don't need to be exact. We just want to get a feel for what these things look like. They're not all the same shape. They're not all perfectly round. There's some of them pointing in different directions. They're all roughly pointing away from the center, but they're a whole bunch of slightly different ovals at different orientations. So we're just going to, using the tip of our brush, the very tip, we're just going to, applying no pressure at all, just add in some little ovals there. Again, not trying to copy the picture exactly, because I think you'd go mad if you did that. Just getting a sense for these little things here. Something to notice as well is that these aren't all the same color. They're sort of spheres, aren't they, in a way? So they've got shadows in some bits. So when we're moving the paint around, if we could just leave the darkest bit of the paint where we see it, that can create a nice, gently 3D effect with these little bits here. Well, folks, I'm just going to pause there because I can see we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I'm aware that you may need to shoot off and do other things. But I hope that this has been a good introduction. Can I just ask, how did everyone feel about the pace that I went at today? Would we rather that we go faster or slower? What do we reckon?
It was fine by me, thank you. It was just right, but you know, I
Yeah.
can't speak for others.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, it was good with me, thank you.
I really
Thanks.
enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm very, very glad to hear. So,
Great. What was really good actually was not mixing colours. I mean,
yes.
because that's quite difficult.
Yes, I think we avoid that for the first session. Yeah, so I'm glad that helped. I think it's just getting comfortable and realizing that there are these different ways of putting the paint. So, setting aside our little brushes, we're going to get up our big brush again, and it's just the same principle as earlier. We're going to bear in mind that we put on light colors first, and we're going to want to apply a nice even coat of a light color. So let's have a look at the colors that we've got here. We've got a few sort of highlights, haven't we, of a bright sort of green, but mainly it's a sort of mid-level sort of foresty green, isn't it? So I'm going to pick one of my colors. I think I'm going to go for this one here. This one that's called, what's that? Leaf green. Leaf green. Thank you. Yes. So we're going to bear that in mind. But first of all, we're just going to take our brush. We're going to wake it up a bit with some water. No paint just yet. Tap off the excess. And then just like we did before, we're just going to, nice and quick, just add a nice film of water to our paper, just so that we've got something to move the paint over nice and smoothly. It's going to be a wee bit fiddlier than before because we're going to want to go around the petals of our flower while obviously not attacking it with water because we don't want it to smudge. So I'm just doing this quite roughly.